The night wind whispered through the jagged canyons of ice beyond the wall, carrying echoes of distant howls and the scrape of old bones buried deep in the snow. In that quiet, haunted gloom, a lone figure trudged forward, cloak tattered at the edges, face pale with dread and half-frozen from the journey. His name was Darren, a ranger of the Night's Watch, and he could sense something terrible looming just out of sight. He thought of home, of the black stone corridors in Castle Black, and tried to imagine the warmth of the hearth fires that no longer seemed so distant, because all that lay before him now was an endless expanse of white, broken only by the shapes of dead trees and the rotting husks of abandoned wildling camps. As he moved on, his breath steaming in the chill air, he couldn't shake the certainty that he was being watched. Perhaps it was the swirling wind or the dancing shapes of frost-laden branches, but the sense of a living, sentient presence gnawed at him. The land felt alive with a power that pulsed beneath its icy shell, a power older than human kingdoms. Even after all his training and the stories he'd heard, Darren felt small under the star-flecked sky. A sudden caw startled him. A raven perched on a broken branch near his path, peering at him with bright, uncanny eyes. Its black feathers shone like polished onyx as it tilted its head, appraising the ranger who stumbled through this desolation. Darren exhaled a shaky breath, relieved that it was only a bird, though in these times, even a lone raven could mean omens and hidden watchers. He remembered stories of the three-eyed raven, that mysterious figure of prophecy rumored to haunt men's dreams. He'd never believed such tales, yet now, in the far north, in the land of legends and nightmares, disbelief was a fragile shield. Clouds dragged across the moon, plunging the terrain into deeper darkness. The raven gave another caw and vanished into the gloom. Darren tightened his grip on his sword hilt, every sense taut. He pressed forward, mindful of every step. In the gloom, boulders loomed, draped with ice, each shape a silent sentinel in the trackless snow. He forced calm into his breathing, but a dread premonition coiled in his chest. Not long after, he reached a ridge overlooking a valley. A thread of moonlight slipped through the clouds, illuminating a distant figure. A young man in a crude wooden sledge, drawn by a great, furred beast. Darren almost cried out in shock. He had glimpsed Bran Stark once at the wall, the boy who had traveled north seeking answers beyond mortal ken. Some said he was the new three-eyed raven, reborn in human flesh. Yet here he sat, motionless, his face turned skyward, eyes white and blank. A presence stood beside him, robed in shadow, as if made from the darkness itself. Darren could not tell if it was living flesh or spirit, for the figure's withered skin clung to bone, and a faint, malevolent glow burned in its gaze. The ranger felt terror rise in his throat. He might have run, but a compulsion rooted him to the spot. Was this the original three-eyed raven? The ancient Targaryen bastard who had ventured beyond the wall and never returned? A faint voice rustled on the wind, though Darren could not tell if it came from the robed figure or from Bran's unmoving lips. "Child," it rasped, "we are one now. Time is our tapestry. We will weave it so that nothing stands in the way of the long night." An icy sweat broke over Darren's skin. Legends painted the three-eyed raven as a savior who guided Greenseers to protect the realm from the others. But what if that was the lie? What if this entity was not a guardian but the architect of doom, shaping men's fates for its own twisted ends? The robed figure turned, and its glowing eyes met Darren's across the distance. For a heartbeat, the ranger felt caught in a snare of ancient power. Then, a low rumble of distant thunder tore him free. Heart pounding, he slid down the ridge to crouch behind a boulder, breath ragged. When he mustered the courage to look again, the clearing was empty. No sledge, no beast, no spectral figure. Terrified but resolved, Darren fled south, determined to warn the Night's Watch. The journey back blurred into a nightmare of cold and fear, but eventually he stumbled through Castle Black's gates, nearly frostbitten. The men of the Watch gathered around his half-coherent story, grim faces lit by torchlight. He spoke of Bran Stark, of a wraith-like presence he believed to be the original three-eyed raven. No one laughed or called him mad. They shared worried glances, then carried his account to their Lord Commander, Edison Tollet. A raven soon went south with a coded message, bearing the warning that the three-eyed raven might be no savior at all, but a manipulator feeding on the realm's tragedies. At Winterfell, Sansa Stark read the message with dread. She had always loved her younger brother, but sensed that something in him had changed after his sojourn beyond the wall. He had returned aloof, cryptic, claiming he was no longer Bran. He'd proven invaluable in the war against the Night King, but now that war was over, and a pall of unease remained. Sansa shared the message with Arya and a small council. Arya's misgivings ran deep. She remembered the chilling detachment in Bran's eyes. Together, they resolved to travel beyond the wall, to find him and uncover the truth. If something ancient had possessed Bran, they would confront it. Summoning a retinue of loyal guards, they set forth on the King's Road. The north was still scarred from war. Ruined villages, half-rebuilt holdfasts, battered hearts. People eyed them with wary respect, but they pressed onward to Castle Black. Lord Commander Tollet received them with haunted eyes. He had heard the Rangers' account firsthand and sensed a gathering darkness beyond the wall. Sansa and Arya ventured forth without delay, leading their men into that bleak northern waste where winter reigned eternal. The journey was grueling, the wind merciless. Dead trees and silent camps told of many who had tried to survive here and failed. Yet day by day they forged on. One night, in a howling snowstorm, they glimpsed a raven perched on a spire of ice, watching them intently. The moment it realized it was seen, it took flight. Sansa shivered, recalling that the three-eyed raven's watchers could be anywhere. That night, both sisters dreamed of weirwoods whose carved faces wept red sap, whispering ominous messages about fate. In the morning, they shared their visions, both unsettled, both determined to press on. At last, they saw a plateau ringed by ancient weirwood trees. Bran stood in its center, alone, rigid. Sansa and Arya approached cautiously, soldiers ready behind them. The crisp air around them felt charged. Bran turned his head, eyes milky. The red leaves of the weirwoods seemed to quiver. A voice that was both Bran's and something else spoke. "You have come far, sisters." "Why?" Fear rippled through Sansa. She spoke bravely. "We came because we heard you were not truly Bran, but a puppet of something old. Tell us it's not so." Bran's face remained unreadable. Then his voice deepened with an ancient timbre. "My name was Brynden Rivers. Now I am the three-eyed raven, and I dwell in every root of the old trees. Did you think the wars ended because men grew wise? No, I pulled the strings so that the realm would unite long enough to defeat the White Walkers. And now I remain, shaping the next chapter." Arya's hand flew to her dagger. "You're manipulating Bran's powers. You brought us all this suffering, winter, war, death, for your own plan." A humorless chuckle drifted from Bran's lips. "Wars breed heroes. Heroes feed legends. Legends grant me power. I have always thrived on the realm's cycle of conflict. When you thought I was saving you, I was preparing my own ascendancy." A horror unlike any they had known seized Sansa's heart. Her love for her brother warred with the realization that he might be irretrievably entangled with this ancient evil. She demanded, "Release him. Release Bran." The entity's gaze flickered, that robed specter momentarily visible in the swirling air. "He and I are one. His gifts are mine now. Turn back if you value your lives." Arya sprang forward, dagger raised to strike, but something froze her in place. An unseen force that paralyzed her limbs. Around them, red leaves trembled, as though the grove itself were alive. The presence's laughter echoed like wind through dead branches. "You cannot kill me with a blade. I am the tapestry of time itself." A swirl of cold mist enveloped Bran, and in a heartbeat, he vanished from the plateau, leaving the grove silent. Arya stumbled free of the invisible grip, furious, while Sansa's men exchanged fearful glances. Their mission had only begun, but the power they faced seemed insurmountable. They journeyed on, a grim determination guiding them. Ice storms assailed them, and ravens circled overhead at every turn. Some nights, illusions haunted their camp, apparitions of lost friends or foes from the past, tormenting them. Yet they pressed deeper into the north, holding onto the vow to free Bran from whatever had claimed him. Days of hardship led them to a hidden hollow where they found footprints. Small, bare footprints shaped like a child's but not human. The children of the forest, perhaps. They followed the tracks into a ring of warped trees and a single standing stone etched with strange glyphs. In the hush that followed, a child of the forest emerged. Sansa and Arya pleaded for help, explaining Bran's plight. The child studied them with luminous eyes, then revealed that long ago, they had aided Bran in becoming a greenseer to oppose the Night King. But the ancient spirit inhabiting the Weirwoods, once the man Brynden Rivers, had turned the powers to darkness. The child offered a solution. A ritual glyph to be carved into the heart tree where Rivers' spirit first took hold, deep in a cave beyond the wall. It would sever the link between the presence and Bran. Yet the price might be steep. Bran could lose his greenseer gifts or worse. Nonetheless, Sansa and Arya vowed to try. The child taught them the incantation and entrusted them with seeds of a cleansed weirwood to plant after the ritual, hoping to grow something pure from the ashes of corruption. Renewed by purpose, they continued their trek. The land seemed to fight them at every step. Freak storms, crumbling ice bridges, illusions conjured to sow despair. They lost men to hidden pits and collapsing ice. But the survivors persisted, forging ahead under Sansa's unwavering leadership. Fear glinted in every eye, yet each soldier understood the stakes. If they failed, the realm might remain an endless playground for an ancient puppeteer. At last, they reached a bleak valley of cracked stone and twisted trees. At the far end, a cavern mouth yawned like the maw of a beast. This, they knew, was where Bran had once found the original three-eyed raven. Sansa felt dread coil in her gut. She gave quiet orders, and they lit torches, descending into the darkness. Inside, the air felt dense with a power that set nerves on edge. Roots dripped from the ceiling in tangled webs, gleaming with faint luminescence. Deeper in, they came upon a vast cavern dominated by a massive weirwood trunk, white as bone, its carved face weeping red sap. There stood Bran, his vacant gaze locked on them. Beside him flickered Rivers' spectral form, a gaunt figure with a single glowing eye. The presence radiated smug confidence. "You came after all," Rivers said through Bran's lips, voice echoing off the walls. "Feudal hope. The realm belongs to me, woven into my tapestry of chaos. You think a mere glyph can sever centuries of power?" Arya snarled a retort, brandishing the stone the child had given her. "We'll see." With that, the cavern erupted into chaos. Roots lashed out from the walls like tentacles, ensnaring men, dragging them into darkness. Ravens flew from hidden alcoves, pecking at faces, sowing panic. Illusions burst into being, visions of the Night King, of long-dead enemies, of personal terrors. Yet through it all, Sansa spotted the trunk at the cavern's heart and forced herself toward it, knife in hand. She ducked a whipping root, ignoring the screams around her. Rivers loomed, intangible yet potent, his outline shimmering around Bran. Arya fought her way closer, steel slicing roots as they flailed. Finally, they reached the trunk. Sansa slammed the stone against the bark, feeling a jolt of energy surge through her. She saw glimpses of ancient wars, heard roars of dragons, felt the anguish of countless souls. But she pushed on, slicing her palm to drip blood onto the wood. Arya, likewise, cut her own flesh, pressing it to the weirwood. Together, they recited the incantation taught by the child. The glyph carved itself into the bark, lines glowing with a crimson light that pulsed like a living thing. Rivers howled in rage, and Bran convulsed, torn between the entity and his own self. The roots thrashed in a final frenzy, bringing down chunks of the cavern's ceiling. Screams echoed as dust and ice filled the air. Sansa and Arya clung to the trunk, voices raised against the din, blood mingling on the bark. The glyph flared brighter, the weirwood trembling under their hands. A searing flash tore through the cavern. When it faded, Rivers's spectral form flickered around Bran, face contorted in fury. "No, I shaped empires. The words splintered as a wave of energy crashed over him. In a shriek that defied mortal hearing, the ancient presence was torn from the weirwood network and scattered into oblivion. Bran collapsed. The roots fell limp. The illusions vanished. Weak light revealed the cavern, half collapsed, with battered survivors pulling themselves free of rubble. Sansa rushed to Bran, dread in her heart. He opened his eyes, warm brown eyes, no longer clouded white. "Sansa," he murmured, voice cracking. "Arya, you found me." Relief broke over them. They helped Bran to his feet and fled the unstable cavern, stopping only so Sansa could plant the weirwood seeds the child had given them. Let something new and clean take root here, free of centuries-old corruption. Outside, dusk lit the snow in shades of pale gold. Bran leaned on them, dazed but himself. The presence was gone. They made camp a safe distance from the cave. Many of their number were wounded or dead, but those who remained clung to each other with a fierce gratitude. That night, Sansa sat by Bran as he slept. His face looked younger, freed from an oppressive burden. Arya hovered near, tension coiled in her muscles, as if expecting rivers to spring from the shadows. But the air felt empty of that ancient malevolence. If the spirit survived at all, it was only as a broken fragment. In the following days, they journeyed south, battered but victorious. Storms eased, and illusions no longer tormented them. At Castle Black, the Night's Watch beheld a weary but lucid Bran Stark. Lord Commander Tallet listened, awed, as Sansa recounted the severing of the old Raven's power. "I don't claim to understand," he said, "but the realm owes you." Returning to Winterfell was like walking out of a terrible dream. Word spread that the three-eyed Raven's manipulation had ended, though most could not fathom its depths. The tension that had long haunted Bran's presence faded. He became again a quiet young man, marked by sorrow but free. Sansa resumed her role as Lady of Winterfell, guiding the North in its slow recovery. Arya roamed the corridors, watchful but calmer, her nightmares fewer now that the puppet master was vanquished. Bran spent long hours in the Godswood, sometimes touching the heart tree with a hesitant hand. He sensed faint echoes of Rivers's presence in the weirwood network, but no driving will. The realm, for the first time in memory, was not nudged along by an all-seeing manipulator. Men would make their own mistakes, wage their own wars, and find their own redemption, without the hidden strings of an ancient power. One clear dawn, the three Stark siblings gathered in the Godswood. The carved weirwood face looked somber rather than menacing, sap no longer weeping. Sansa spoke first. "We did it. We broke his hold." Arya nodded, remembering the illusions and the final scream as Rivers was cast out. "If he lingers, he's weak and scattered. We'll face him again if we must." Bran gazed at the rustling branches overhead. "I remember some of what he saw. He stoked chaos because it fed him. He believed conflict was the only path to keep the realm alive. But the cost," he shuddered. "Unbearable." Sansa touched his shoulder gently. "You're free to be Bran now. The realm can breathe without his chains." He managed a small smile. "Thank you. I owe you both everything." They stood in the hush of the Godswood, letting the morning light wash over them. Far above, a raven passed across the sky. Once, they might have braced themselves for a sign of Rivers's watchful eye, but now it was just a bird, bound by its own nature and nothing more. In the months that followed, the North rebuilt with renewed hope. Sansa oversaw trade and reconstruction, forging alliances built on mutual need rather than impending doom. Arya assisted in subtle ways, ensuring no vestiges of Rivers's shadow remained in the outlying wilds. And Bran lived quietly among them, no longer a distant oracle. Occasionally, he used his Greenseer insight to help, but he kept his mind firmly in the present, wary of the temptation that had ensnared Brynden Rivers centuries before. Small folk whispered stories that the ancient puppet master who once haunted the Weirwoods had been exorcised by Stark resolve. No one quite knew the details, but they felt the change. A sense that the realm's destiny was no longer bound by an unseen hand. Peace might not last forever, but at least it was theirs to shape. Late one afternoon, Sansa strolled the battlements of Winterfell, gazing out at fields blanketed by thinning snow. She recalled Rivers's chilling claim that all roads led to doom. Yet here she was, under a pale sun, carrying new responsibilities and hopes. The realm's future was uncertain, but not preordained by an ancient will. That was enough. Arya joined her, leaning against the cold stone. "I never thought I'd say it," she murmured. "But everything feels lighter." Sansa nodded, letting a soft smile grace her features. "Because the shadows aren't quite so dark anymore." They looked below into the courtyard, where Bran was helping instruct a small group of children about the old gods and the North's heritage. He no longer gazed off at invisible timelines. Instead, he seemed earnest, grounded. A gentle breeze rustled through the yard, carrying laughter. Spring glimmered at the edges of the land, hinting at renewal. Perhaps Rivers had once harnessed conflict to strengthen his hold, but now men and women could heal without his interference. That evening, Winterfell hosted a modest feast, a simple celebration of survival and unity. The great hall reverberated with conversation and the clatter of wooden bowls. People sang snatches of old songs, no longer overshadowed by heartbreak. Sansa watched her people with quiet pride, thinking of how far they'd come since the darkest days of the wars. When the feast ended, she slipped away to her chambers, too restless to sleep. She wandered instead to the Godswood, where the moonlight kissed the pale bark of the heart tree. She placed her palm against it, remembering the old terror she once felt, the stories of a benevolent raven who watched over them. Now she knew the truth was more complicated, that the original three-eyed raven had used prophecy and dreams to shape events for centuries, fueling tragedies and alliances that ultimately benefited him. But that power was finally broken. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure whom she thanked. Perhaps the children who had shown them the ritual, or the old gods themselves, or simply the stubborn courage of the Starks. The leaves stirred in the faint breeze, and for once, she sensed no hidden presence, no ancient gaze pressing on her thoughts. Just the serene hush of a place older than man's wars. A few days later, as the northern weather began to soften, neighbors from distant holdfasts came to see Bran with their own eyes. Rumors abounded of a dark sorcerer cast out and the new three-eyed raven restored to mortal form. Most visitors found only a courteous young man in place of the distant seer who had once unnerved them. Sansa received them in the great hall, offering reassurance that no malevolent force now lurked behind Bran's gaze. Some brought gifts to honor House Stark for its mysterious victory. Others left only well wishes, or tales of sorrow that might have been sparked by Rivers's manipulations. Sansa listened with compassion, steeling her resolve to lead the North into a freer, kinder era. In quieter moments, Arya practiced with a new steel-tipped spear in the courtyard, face glowing with the honest thrill of sparring. Sometimes she glanced skyward when a raven passed, ready for any sign of the old spirit. None appeared. The birds flew on, bound only by instinct. Watching them depart, Arya felt a deep, private triumph. Bran found solace in tasks that kept him grounded, helping inventory the library's old records, or assisting with repairs in outlying farmsteads. He laughed at the small joys of daily life, relieved that they were not overshadowed by Rivers's endless stream of visions. The gloom that once shrouded him had lifted. Whenever nightmares woke him, he reminded himself that the puppet master had lost his strings. One brisk afternoon, the three Stark siblings paused near Winterfell's outer walls, observing workers shoring up defenses still damaged from the wars. The sky was clear, the air crisp. Sansa gazed at Bran and Arya, marveling at how all of them had survived. "We did it," she said quietly. "We broke the chain." Arya nodded. Bran squeezed Sansa's hand, saying nothing. The path ahead was their own to choose, no longer dictated by a hidden force. Whatever trials might come, they were free to face them as themselves, three siblings bound by love, rather than pawns in an ancient scheme. and in that shared resolve, they found a sense of hope that felt new and precious. That night, under moonlight, Sansa ventured again to the Godswood. It was peaceful, the heart tree's carved face blending into moonlit bark. She remembered how Rivers had claimed that conflict was inevitable and necessary, that the realm needed a guiding hand in the shadows. But the realm was forging on just fine without him. People rebuilt, found laughter amid sorrow, and shaped new stories free of an ancient puppet master. She traced a hand across the tree's trunk, recalling how Rivers had once lurked in every crevice of the Weirwood network. Now that presence was torn away, shattered by the bond of Stark blood. She felt no regret at what they had done. Men and women should steer their own destinies, even if they erred along the way. At length, she left the Godswood, comforted by the silence. Dawn found her atop the ramparts, gazing over the frosted fields where patches of green hinted at spring. Peace might not endure forever, but it was real for now. The wind ruffled her hair, and she breathed it in, letting the cold fill her lungs. The three-eyed raven's doom had been broken, and the North belonged to its people once again. Meanwhile, in some lonely corner of the far north, a raven might still caw at the gathering dusk. If a sliver of Rivers' spirit clung to those black wings, it did so powerless, reduced to an echo in the endless wind. The puppets had cut their strings. The realm was free to dream its own future. And at Winterfell, in the warmth of the rising sun, Sansa, Arya, and Bran, children of House Stark, woke each day with gratitude that the ancient shadow had finally lifted. They traveled on, forging through a wilderness of howling wind and endless white. Each sunrise felt weaker than the last, and the retinue's spirits frayed beneath the weight of cold and dread. Sansa Stark and Arya Stark pressed ahead, unwilling to abandon the hope of saving Bran from the ancient power that claimed him. They saw ravens everywhere, perched on dead trees or wheeling through the sky, as though mocking their resolve. At times the birds seemed to vanish, replaced by ghostly whispers that tugged at their minds. Memories of old horrors, glimpses of lost loved ones, half-formed illusions. Yet Sansa pressed on. If the three-eyed raven indeed guided all toward doom, she would confront it on its own ground. A week beyond the last outpost of the Night's Watch, they came across a grim sight, a frozen battlefield where wildling bones jutted from the snow. Ravens pecked at ragged cloaks and shattered weapons. Sansa knelt, frowning at the remains, wondering what conflict had occurred here. Arya spotted a single weirwood stump near the edge of the field, carved with a crude face. It glared at them, as though witnessing yet another tragedy. "Rivers watches," Arya murmured, running a hand over the stump's splintered bark. "He draws strength from chaos." Sansa's jaw clenched. "Then let's deprive him of that strength." She led them onward, deeper into the land of ancient forests and drifting snow, determined to reach the cave Bran had once entered in search of truth. Days later, they found a narrow canyon hidden behind ice-crusted boulders. At its end loomed a dark cavern mouth. Sansa knew it from Bran's old descriptions. Fear stirred in her chest. "This is where he went to learn from the old three-eyed raven," she said. Within that cavern, the chill air felt heavier, charged with an unsettling presence. The retinue lit torches, revealing roots that coiled along the walls like serpents. Farther in, a single weirwood trunk burst through the stone, thick and ancient. At its base stood Bran Stark, eyes vacant, lips drawn in a thin line. Arya approached with caution. "Bran?" she whispered. He did not move. From the corner of the chamber, a second shape emerged, thin, pale, half-merged with shadows. It wore Brynden Rivers' gaunt visage, a faint glimmer in its sunken eye socket. The old Targaryen bastard spirit regarded them with cruel amusement. "You came all this way," Rivers said, voice layered with Bran's. "Did you truly believe you could break my hold?" Sansa felt her resolve flare. "Bran is our brother. We won't let you twist him any longer." Rivers' spectral mouth curved into a mirthless smile. "Your brother invited me in, seeking knowledge beyond mortal understanding. I gave him the sight, and in return he shares his flesh. That bond is older than these kingdoms. War after war, I have stoked the flames. Peace makes men weak. I guide them to conflict so they never forget fear, and so I remain eternal. Your time is done, Arya said, drawing a dagger. We'll free Bran. Rivers let out a low laugh, and the roots above began to writhe. The chamber rattled as if breathing, stalactites shifting. Illusions swirled, the faces of lost friends, horrifying events best left buried. Several in the retinue cried out, collapsing in confusion. Still, Sansa held onto a single goal: carve the glyph taught by the children of the forest and sever Rivers' link. The trunk's bark revealed a faint outline of a carved face. Summoning courage, Sansa advanced. A root lashed out at her, but Arya sprang to intercept, steel flashing. Another root barreled into them both, knocking them off their feet. Rocks tumbled from above, sending up clouds of icy dust. Sansa crawled forward, ignoring the pain in her limbs. She reached the trunk, pressing trembling hands against the bark. The memory of the child's instructions rang in her mind. "Sister," Arya yelled, tossing her a small chiseled stone etched with spirals. Sansa caught it, pressing it to the trunk. The wood pulsed, resisting. Rivers's voice echoed everywhere. "You would betray your own blood, your own brother, to banish me? You've betrayed the entire realm," Sansa managed, her voice shaking. "Bran will be free." With a slicing motion, she cut her palm, letting blood seep onto the bark. The trunk seemed to absorb it, shuddering like a living beast in pain. The glyph began to form, lines glowing faintly. Rivers roared in anger. Bran staggered, hand grasping at empty air. For a moment, his own eyes flickered through the milky sheen, desperate and pleading. Arya, blood running from a cut above her brow, fought the thrashing roots to join Sansa. She, too, let her blood touch the trunk. They chanted the incantation the child had whispered to them in the hidden grove. The roots shrieked, slamming against the walls. Rivers lunged, passing in and out of Bran's body like a black mist. "I have seen ages rise and fall," he hissed, "and you are but a fleeting moment." Yet the glyph's glow intensified, fed by stark blood and unwavering will. A crimson radiance spread through the wood, illuminating the chamber. Sansa felt a wave of raw power that nearly overwhelmed her. A torrent of visions. Dragons, kings, betrayals, triumphs, threads of time unraveling. Then a final, wrenching jolt. The presence ripped free from Bran's flesh, howling like a wounded beast. Rivers's form flickered, transparent, face contorted in rage. "No!" he screamed, voice echoing against the stone. "I was shaping the realm. In a burst of searing light, the bond snapped. Rivers's spirit fragmented, dispersing like dust caught in a wind. Bran collapsed to his knees, eyes returning to a gentle brown. The roots fell limp. The illusions vanished, leaving only echoes of frightened cries. Silence settled like a heavy shroud. Sansa and Arya rushed to Bran's side. He blinked up at them, unsteady. "Sansa, Arya," his voice shook with grief. "I saw everything he did, everything he planned. He used me, used us all. We know," Arya said softly, helping him stand. "But he's gone now." Bran's gaze roamed the devastated cavern. A few of their allies lay injured, while others tended to them. Did we really break his power?" Sansa exhaled, tears stinging her eyes. "Yes, the link is severed." She reached out to embrace Bran, and he clung to her as if terrified she might vanish. For a moment, the weight of centuries of manipulation pressed upon them, then lifted. Rivers was gone. They hurried to the cave's entrance, half carrying Bran. The roof cracked and shifted, on the verge of collapse without the presence holding it stable. By the time they emerged, dawn light shimmered off the snow outside. A cold wind blew, but it carried no sense of looming malice. The ravens that circled overhead now felt no different from ordinary birds. That night, they camped under the open sky, huddled in thick furs. The retinue, though diminished, gathered around to share relief and grief. Bran slept fitfully, haunted by residual visions, but no longer controlled. Sansa and Arya took turns keeping watch, though neither sensed the dread presence anymore. The air felt cleaner, as if something toxic had been purged. In the days that followed, they made their journey back to Winterfell. The weather still tested them, but nature's fury was no longer fueled by an ancient will. On the road, they spoke little, each lost in private reflections. Sometimes Bran would murmur about the future's rivers had shown him. Kingdoms set aflame, horrors unleashed. Arya would quietly respond. He wanted endless conflict. It fed him, and Bran would nod in sorrow. At Castle Black, the Night's Watch greeted them with astonishment. Word had spread of the new three-eyed raven, but the man who stood among them was a weary youth named Bran, awake in his own skin. Lord Commander Tallet asked for their account, and Sansa offered the brief version. The commander only shook his head in wonder. "A victory for the realm," he said gravely, "though few will ever grasp it." Onward they went, hearts bent on reaching Winterfell. When at last the castle's gray walls rose on the horizon, Sansa felt tears well in her eyes. Home. Here, they could begin repairing the hurts wrought by Rivers' hidden guidance. If the ancient spirit had indeed haunted Westeros for centuries, it was difficult to fathom the depth of its influence. But at least now it was severed from the Weirwoods, broken from Bran's gifts. Inside Winterfell's gates, relief met them in hushed murmurs. People saw Bran walking on his own, eyes ordinary, and marveled. Soldiers knelt in gratitude that the rumored three-eyed raven's dread power was gone. Arya patrolled the corridors, half expecting to sense illusions at every corner, but found none. Sansa resumed her station as Lady of Winterfell. The weight was immense, yet somehow lighter than before. A few nights later, Sansa found Bran in the Godswood, studying the old heart tree. "It's still full of memories," he said softly as she approached. "But Rivers isn't in them the way he was. I can't feel him twisting the branches anymore." She touched the carved trunk beside him. "So he's truly gone?" "As far as I can tell," Bran replied. "There might be fragments, echoes, but without the link, he's powerless." The tension in Sansa's heart eased further. She felt gratitude and sadness too. "Rest now," she said, guiding him back toward the keep. "Let us shape our future, free of him." Bran nodded, exhaustion shadowing his face. In the courtyard, Arya stood beneath a torchlit arch, arms folded. She offered a small, tight smile. "I checked the walls. No sign of ravens acting strangely tonight." "Good," Sansa murmured. "Let them just be birds." Together, they ascended into the halls of Winterfell. The staff had prepared simple meals and tended the wounded from their retinue. Life within the castle moved toward a cautious normalcy. Outside, the snows gradually began to melt, revealing patches of thawing earth. It was far from a bright southern spring, but it felt like hope. Over the next weeks, a sense of calm spread. Sansa met with northern lords, forging new alliances aimed at rebuilding. Arya ventured into the surrounding lands, ensuring no remnant of Rivers' illusions persisted. Bran spent time helping scribes preserve old records, a task he found soothing, a reminder that knowledge should belong to all rather than be twisted for one being's gain. The North discovered a measure of peace in these small labors. No longer did an unseen puppet master nudge events toward calamity. Whatever new storms the future might hold, they would be natural storms, shaped by human frailty or ambition, not an ancient will feeding on conflict. That alone felt like a gift beyond measure. Some months later, Sansa and Arya stood on the ramparts, gazing at the green-gray fields below. Farmers toiled, coaxing life from the soil. Smoke rose from chimneys in the nearby town. Sansa closed her eyes, breathing the crisp air. She recalled the days of believing all was lost, that Rivers' manipulations were unstoppable. Yet here she stood, free. Arya gently touched her arm. "Are you worried he might return?" Sansa considered. "Worried? Yes, but not afraid. We know how to fight him now, and we won't be alone." They both glanced down at Bran in the courtyard, calmly instructing a circle of children about local lore. He was no longer a remote oracle but a kind young man, scarred by experience, yet determined to use what remained of his gifts wisely. Sansa smiled softly, a warmth rising in her chest. They descended the steps and joined their brother among the children. The future would doubtless hold challenges, perhaps conflicts, perhaps disasters. But these would be fought and resolved by mortals on their own terms. Even if mistakes were made, they would be theirs to own. And that was all the more precious. High overhead, a raven soared across the sky. Its cry blended with the sounds of daily life, voices in the yard, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the sigh of the wind in the trees. Sansa looked up, meeting the bird's inky silhouette without flinching. If any trace of rivers remained in that raven's eyes, it was merely a powerless shadow, a relic of a reign undone by courage and unity. The realm now belonged to those who lived in it, free at last from the three-eyed raven's centuries of hidden dominion. And in that realization lay the promise of a new age, one not shaped by a silent puppet master, but by the will and hope of the people themselves. The Starks had faced darkness older than the oldest tales, and they had emerged bloodied but unbowed, forging a future that no ancient curse could claim. In the hush of that understanding, the North took its first true breath of freedom in living memory, and the story of Westeros turned to a fresh page, free at long last from the inevitable doom that had once seemed unbreakable.